Of all my books, it's the most difficult for me to summarize in one sentence. So tonight I'm going to read 3 passages. I'm going to read for about 25 minutes. I'm going to read 3 different passages, all from early in the novel. But each section should give you a sense of the different voices, the different moments in time when this book takes place. So I think I'll just plunge right in. I'll pause between each of the 3 sections, and then I'll be happy to take any and all questions and explain the evolution of this book and where I hope it's going. Rotterdam, May 1940. Nay! Mother shrieks and keeps on shrieking. Nay! Nay! It becomes, after a while, like the squeal of an infant, the anguished protest, denial, plea of a barely verbal human. Mother's shriek cannot blot out the roar above you, though that is what Ketya seems to be trying to do. The roar above you is colossal, otherworldly. You are huddled with your family in the cellar, but you feel as if even the underground might give way. As if, from here, you might drop into the bowels of the earth and plummet straight down into hell. Later in life, you will find it hard to accept that the bombing lasted only 10 minutes. Nay! Mother continues to shriek, even after the thunder above has gone suddenly silent. Through the entire bombing, you've been curled up in Mother's arms, the 2 of you sitting on the floor, crushed against the cellar wall. Across from you, wedged against the opposite wall of the cellar, amid the clutter of a couple of rusting bicycles, pots of paint, and cartons of books, sat Father and Femke. Father kept his hands over his ears during the attack, though you wonder if it was Mother's shrieks that assaulted his ears even more than the whistle and the crash of the bombs. Femke had kept her head bowed. You wondered if she was praying. Then you remember that just last week she told you she no longer believes in God. Now she looks up at Mother, who is still wailing. Nay! Shut up, Mother, Femke barks. And to your astonishment, Mother shuts up immediately. The port of Rotterdam is on fire, and a south wind carries the flames through the city. The fire is like a fierce living beast, stalking its way forward, block by block, seeming to approach gradually, yet inexorably, until it is right upon its prey, devouring all with devastating quickness. Your memories of this day, and the days immediately after, will forever be fragmented. They will come to you in flashes, vivid and frightening, but with the sudden displacements, non-sequential jumps, the same sense of unreality and dread as in a nightmare. You don't remember emerging from the cellar or walking through the bookshop, but you do remember stepping outside your parents' store. Your block seems to have been unharmed by the bombing, but the sky is covered with gray smoke, as dense as storm clouds. The street is filled with people hurrying from their homes and shops, carrying suitcases and, bizarrely, mattresses. Many people are pushing bicycles. There is an urgency in the crowd, but nothing like panic. There is no screaming or crying, but you see a strange look on people's faces, an indescribable blankness. You don't know where everyone is going, but they all seem to be walking quickly in the same direction. Eat! Mother snaps at Father. Leave the books. Take the mattress. You are inside the Versloot family apartment, just above the bookshop. Mother and Femke are quickly stuffing clothes and provisions into suitcases. Father moves sluggishly about the living room, like a man absent-mindedly puttering, gathering books, trying to get his papers in order. You see on his face the same blankness that you saw on the faces of the people in the street. Now you recognize what it is: bewilderment. Mother's cry does not snap Father out of his fog, but he does set down his books and disappear into the bedroom. Now you are hurrying down the street, following the crowd to some unknown destination. You walk four abreast, the Versloot family. Never before in your 9.5 years of life have you felt such a tribal connection to your mother and father and sister. You carry a backpack strapped around your shoulders. You have no idea what has been stuffed inside it. Mother carries a suitcase in each hand. Father carries a suitcase in his left hand and under his right arm a bare mattress. Mother and father both have that bewildered look on their faces, the look you see everywhere in the crowd, the look that silently poses the question, how can this be happening to us? Femke, your sister, your heroine, 9 years older than you, the person who looms largest in your dreams, your most private thoughts, walks beside you, between you and your parents, pushing a bicycle. Femke does not have the same bewildered expression as everyone else in this hurrying crowd. Femke's eyes are blazing. Tears stream down her face, but she does not make a sound. She does not seem to want to be consoled. Hers are not tears of sorrow, but of fury, of outrage. Strapped on the back of her bicycle, atop a small suitcase, is her drawing kit, paint box, and several sketch pads. No one in your family speaks. You just keep walking, the Versloot tribe, among all the other tribes of Rotterdam. The fire royals, still many blocks behind you, stalking you. The clouds above are changing color, from pewter to charcoal. Your nostrils bristle with an acrid smell, an odor you've never inhaled before, a mixture of gasoline and grilling sausages. At long last, after all that walking, the Versloot family and all the other tribes have arrived at what must have been, all along, the destination. It is a huge open field of stubbly grass, far from the city center. People drop their mattresses on the ground. They lay down their suitcases and bicycles, defining loose borders for their family's piece of the terrain. This is where they will live for the foreseeable future, in the open air. People stand in the huge field and stare back at their burning city. The storm clouds of smoke are impenetrably black now, unbelievably immense, billowing from the distant harbor, spilling across the sky. Joop Versloot stands with his father, staring out at the smoke. Giet wears his helpless, bewildered look. Joop's mother, Katja, is sitting on the mattress, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders convulsing. He can barely hear her muffled sobs. Nay, nay, nay. A few feet away, Femke sits cross-legged on the stubbly grass. A sketch pad is in her lap, a charcoal pencil poised between her fingers. She is drawing the destruction. So I'm going to make a big leap in time now. That was the opening chapter, or excerpts from the opening chapter. The book then jumps to May 2001, 61 years later. A lot of this next section is in dialogue, so I'm going to subtly shift my body when I change from one speaker to the other. Sometimes this works. I hope it does tonight. So, Femke had a long face, just 1 or 2 centimeters shy of horsey. Hers was a most idiosyncratic beauty, far too eccentric for consensus. The huge, translucent blue eyes on the border of bulbous, the vast and toothsome grin that skimmed the line between funny-looking and dazzlingly, invitingly sensual. Femke was tall, big-boned, and, when she was much younger, loose-limbed, almost gangly. She flailed her arms about when she talked, loped down the street, exuded a grace so uncanny it seemed at first a kind of awkwardness. But Femke was always at ease with her own body, and she was one of those people who just seemed switched on with a palpable, even a pheromonal, sexual charisma. Femke, in her 20s, 30s, and 40s, had a mane of dirty blonde hair. She always looked tousled and blousy, usually wore men's clothes, flannel shirts, and paint-splattered trousers. But even in a skirt, Femke managed to look tomboyish. It was that air of carnality, that sense in both body and spirit of being ready for anything. When she grew older and her hair turned a fine and creamy shade of white, Femke still had this scent of lustiness about her. Femke's beauty was of the permanent kind. Her peculiar radiance made her sexy, disquietingly sexy, I should say, at 79 years old. Sickened was how I felt, not by the thought itself, but by the fact that I was thinking this thought and finding it titillating. The thought of having sex with a woman old enough to be my grandmother. But knowing that the sex would never occur, what hung in the air between us was at the tingle of a flirtation, as I sat across the table from Femke Versloot. The old painter pulls out a pack of Lucky Strikes, notices me staring hungrily as she fires one up. She holds out the pack. You want? I can't resist. I've been trying to quit. Somehow it feels like a loaded moment. I put the cigarette between my lips and hold out my hand, expecting Femke to place her elegant little gold lighter in my palm. Instead, she snaps it open. I lean forward as Femke lights my cigarette, feeling as if I'm in a 40s film noir. Femke is what they used to call a broad, a tough dame. But as I bow toward her flame, it occurs to me that we've switched roles. As the man, I was supposed to be lighting her cigarette. As I lean back again, I feel a confusing rush of emotion. I had grown used to smoking alone, so there was a tingle of complicity in smoking with Femke, giving in to my secret vice. But smoking one of her cigarettes, having her offer me the forbidden weed, having her ignite it for me, suddenly it feels less like a Bogey and Bacall moment and more like grandma spooning baby food into an infant's mouth. Why are you interested in me, Toby? It's not because of Saskia. Not at all. With all due respect to your granddaughter, I am a professor at this university. My dissertation was on abstract expressionism, and I'd like to publish my first book. Publish or perish, Femke mutters, and I choose to ignore the remark. Publish my first book on your work, because you are part of a magnificent generation of artists working in America, and I think that your work was, well, if not ignored, then overlooked. Overlooked. They looked me over, then they decided to look over me. You could say that. But now you're considered part of the canon. Ugh! The noise that erupts from Femke sounds like a dry heave, as if she were about to vomit all over the table. You people really talk like that. Sorry. I sometimes read about this canon of yours, but do you mean to say that in normal conversation you speak seriously about a canon? A clumsy lap into academic jargon. Please forgive me. And so I am canon fodder for you. I have to chuckle. Good one. Very good. And the arbiters of this canon of yours? Yes, I know, it's very presumptuous, but who are they? You must know. What I'm talking about is a consensus. A consensus of whom? Yes, of course, you're right. Right about what? I haven't stated a position. Academics. Every word now is painful, forced out of my throat. Art specialists and historians, critics. Oh, for Christ's sake. Femke is only the trace of an accent, vague and undefinable. European, you would surmise, but hers is one of those charmingly exotic and unplaceable foreign lilts. Whatever language she was speaking, you imagined she'd sound foreign in it. I'm not expressing myself as convincingly as I should. You'll never convince me, Toby. Well, I didn't mean to. People always prefer their artists dead, don't they? I think, why is that? Well, I would say prices of the works go up and up. The writings about the work become more positive, more thoughtful. The writer becomes more respected as a human being. You're better off dead. After feeling backed on my heels, stammering, barely coherent, I strike back. Are you afraid of death? Femke Versloot takes a long drag on her cigarette, squints sleepily as she exhales. I do not fear it. I dread it. I'm not afraid about the pain that might come with it. I'm not afraid about what might happen after death, because I think nothing happens. But I dread. You understand me? Well, I dread the idea that all this is going to end, that I will never get to see another Sausalito sunrise. I'll never get to share a beer and a laugh with my granddaughter again. It's all over, the end of all this. Even sitting here, talking to you, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the American Middle West. I don't fear the end of everything. I dread it, because I just love life so much. I love all the sensations, all the aspects, all the banal things, even the brutal ones, of being alive. You love the brutality of life? Well, let's not exaggerate. I'm speaking of the war, of course. Which war? Is she being disingenuous? Provocative? The Second World War. Ah, yes, everybody's favorite war. As I understand it, you were a member of the Dutch resistance. So many were. I'm not a big deal. Yes, but Femke, to get back to your art, you want to make a name for yourself after I'm dead. You calculate that I won't live too long. You know people prefer their artists dead. You are what, a specialist? I'm certainly not setting out to write a biography. So you said. But you know I'm a cancer survivor. Saskia must have told you. That has nothing to do with... I catch myself. What I mean to say is, Femke, everyone wants you to live just long enough to be profitable. For them, the inheritors. Okay, maybe we should stop. Look, Toby, I understand who you are. I understand better than you know. And I will work with you, when and whenever I feel like it. Thank you, Femke. Do you know why I finally, after all this time, receive the acclaim I deserve? No. Because I outlived my enemies. They are all dead. That's it. You mean the arbiters of what matters? Yes, I've outlived the sons of bitches. So now I can be treated fairly by the sons of bitches of your generation. Once you are dead, Toby, the good artists of your generation will have a chance. May I say something, please? The ones who die before you, you will love. Femke, please, I want to write a book about you to make your name as an art historian. She has exhausted me. I sigh. I say nothing in my defense. I do understand your ambition. Believe you me, Toby White. Thank you, Femke. I guess. If ambition is even what we are talking about. So, we have a deal, so to speak. So to speak, with one condition, which is, everything I say to you tonight is off the record. Of course. So, I have just one more section to read. The shortest, the shortest of these three excerpts. Jackson Pollock was not simply a genius. He was a vulgar, drunken pig. Never more so than during his appearances at the Cedar Tavern, the favorite watering hole of the Abstract Expressionists. He only ever showed up on Tuesday nights, after coming into the city from the Springs, Long Island, for his weekly psychiatrist's appointment. Pollock, the ravaged, balding Wyoming cowboy, would burst into the seedy, smoky bar and start hurling insults, calling his fellow artists whores and worms, smashing glasses, overturning tables, once even ripping a swinging bathroom door from its hinges. Wild man shit. He'd grab breasts and buttocks, push his face close to a woman's, blasts of reeking bum's breath, and say, "Wanna fuck?" Most of the women at the Cedar either recoiled in horror or laughed it off. Jackson Pollock was generally tolerated. He was, after all, regarded as the reigning genius of this time and place. But there is an anecdote, rarely mentioned in all the Pollock legendary, but fondly remembered by some who witnessed the incident, about a particular female artist at the Cedar who responded more robustly to the attentions of the genius pig. It was October 1955. Pollock had always given Femke Versloot a wide berth. Difficult to say why, since she was a lusty, approachable gal. Certainly Pollock would not have resisted harassing Femke just because she was known to be living with another artist in the small universe of Greenwich Village, Timothy Keaton Channing. Pollock habitually groped the wives and girlfriends of other men, even in the presence of the other men. Something must have spooked Jackson about Femke. But on this night, he staggered drunkenly toward the Dutchwoman, grasped her around the shoulders, leaned in close, and said something that practically no one but Femke heard. With a quickness and a violence that startled everyone standing nearby, Femke jerked away from Pollock, took 2 steps backward as if to measure the distance between them, then swung her right fist, slamming it into Pollock's left cheek with a loud, fleshy smack, sending the genius pig stumbling on his heels, then crashing spectacularly to the barroom floor, unconscious. Timmy Channing, aghast, immediately grabbed his girlfriend and hustled her toward the door. Those who had seen the punch burst into applause as Femke and Timmy disappeared into the night. It took a couple of minutes before Franz Klein was able to fully revive Pollock. At the Cedar Tavern, for many Tuesday nights afterward, Klein, a mustachioed lion of a man, would needle Pollock over having been knocked out cold by a woman. Pollock would pretend not to remember what had happened, but at the mention of Femke Versloot's name, he would growl, "That fucking cunt." Femke Versloot and Timmy Channing, a fairly visible couple in this Greenwich Village universe, stayed away from the Cedar for a long time after Femke clocked Pollock. Folks believed it was Timmy who was afraid of returning, not Femke. Even once they started showing up again, in the spring of '56, it was never on Tuesday nights. That August, Pollock crashed his car on Long Island, killing himself and another passenger, the immensely unlucky Edith Metzger. So what had Pollock said that made Femke so angry? What could he possibly have said that would have been worse, more offensive than any of the obscenities he snarled at other women? Whatever the provocation, decking Jackson Pollock, so far as I could remember, was Femke Versloot's greatest claim to fame. Thank you. Actually, in the first segment, which is it's in the second person, you, but it's from the perspective of Femke's little brother, Joop. And then the next 2 sections, even though the third section is more general, it's through the voice is Toby White, the art historian. So there's an art historian named Toby White who's the book is really in one sense a duel. The main action takes place in 2001, and there's an art historian named Toby White who's dating this painter's granddaughter. Femke Versloot was largely unrecognized when she was doing her best work back in the 50s, but then starting in 1991. She starts to gain recognition. So by the time the main frame of the story begins in 2001, Toby wants to be the first art historian to write a big book on her life. And she wants to cooperate to a certain extent, but there's a lot she doesn't want to talk about. And that's really the cat and mouse game between Toby and Femke. Do you have a question?
Well, I just wondered what the complications were of getting it published in English.
Yeah, well, you know, I knew this book would be a hard sell. And it's the first of my books that I wrote without a contract. Going back to 1989, I would give my agent a few chapters of a book. She would get a publisher, I'd get an advance to write the book, get the second half of the advance when the book was published. I knew because I had this idea, just the fact that it was about a painter, I knew would make it a difficult sell. I didn't seek a contract back in 2008. I instead became a ward of the French state and received a grant from the Centre National du Livre, which financed the first year of the writing of the book. And then I began a residency out in Bobigny, which helped pay for the next year or so of the writing of the book. When I finally had a complete manuscript, I gave it to my agent. She read and she said, "Jake, what is this?" It's a book about a painter. She really just didn't get it. And I was feeling kind of discouraged, and then I showed it to my French editor. Now, my French editor, François Guérif, at Rivages, he had started publishing me with my most thrillerish book, a book called If Six Were Nine, that came out as Le Caméléon Noir in France. But François read this manuscript, loved it, said, "Jake, I'm going to publish it." So I could then go back to my agent and say, "We've got a deal pending in France, so, get on board." And she did. I revised the manuscript. She made a good effort to sell it, and people turned it down. And I think, there could be lots of reasons. I have lots of friends in the States who are having trouble getting a fifth or sixth book published. With Amazon and everything that's happening in the American publishing industry, publishers are just scared. And there's sort of two groups of writers who are safe: big best-selling authors and first-timers, because people are willing to take a chance on a débutant. But the 80% of writers who are not either writing a first book or bestsellers, we're getting squeezed. But there's also the question of branding, and this is a big thing in America now. Everybody has a brand. Every celebrity has a brand. Every company, every political party has a brand. And a lot of what I was getting in these rejections was this sense that, oh, I have a brand. I'm the black guy who lives in Paris and writes thrillers. And this is not a thriller. It's not set in Paris. It has nothing to do with racial questions. And so people would say to my agent, "Oh, I like Jake's books. Send me his next one." No, not this one. But I'm still hopeful. And the day the book appeared in France, an interview that I did with an art website called Hyperallergic. I was interviewed by a brilliant artist and writer who's here tonight, Joseph Nekvatal. That interview appeared, and that piqued the interest of a publisher in New York. So I hope someday this book will get published in the language in which it was written. No, but the second draft I did was before the translator got her hands on it. So there was enough of a lag between when François Guérif said, "Yes, I want to do it." I then went back to my agent. I don't think I'd already revised it when I went back to my agent. By the time the translator was ready, I gave her the revised version.
So it's the same book?
It's the same book. It's the same book, yeah. And I have to say, it's an excellent translation. I picked this translator. She had done one of my other books, and I really liked her work. So, all of my books begin with characters. I know writers who start with a theme or a setting or a political idea. My books always begin with characters. Going back to my first book, which is nonfiction, but I wanted to write about my father because he was such an interesting character. So my books always begin with characters, and this character, Femke Versloot, just walked into my office one night in 2008. I wasn't sure where she came from, but I see now how she embodies two interests of mine that have been growing over the years.
She walked into your office, or she walked into your mind?
Sometimes characters feel so real, it's as if they're a physical presence. I know that sounds crazy, but a lot of writers say this. She walked into my mind, but it was as if, I could see her, I could smell her, I knew who she was. And that's when that's when I know I have a book. When a character arrives and feels so real and is forcing me to write their story. So yes, she walked into my mind, but in another sense, she walked into my life and didn't leave for 4 years. She embodies two interests, as I was saying. One was this generation of artists, the Abstract Expressionists. And, I liked this work when I lived in America, but I just became more and more fascinated by it in the 20 years I've been in Europe. And what I love about the Abstract Expressionists is that they just pushed painting, certainly as far as anyone believed it could go at that point. You know, there's no portraits, no landscapes, no still lifes. It's just an internal explosion presented on the canvas. And they were also, to my mind, the last generation of artists in America who viewed making art as a kind of heroic existential quest. Andy Warhol basically demolished that idea at the beginning of the 60s. And today, this idea that the artist is somehow a hero outside of society, this maybe some French people still think this, but in America, this is an idea that's just gone. You know, art's a commodity, anybody can do it. I mean, there's lots of different ideas about making art today. But this was the last generation that really thought they were on a mission. And I knew artists, writers of that generation. It's not just painters. I mean, I knew writers from that generation who had that same sense of what they do, musicians. And if you think that the 50s is the same time as bebop and the beat generation, all over you have these artists pushing their form as far as it will go. So that fascinated me. And the other interest was how World War II played out in the daily lives of people in Europe. You know, when I was growing up in America, and it was a particular time, it was the 60s, and there was still a kind of triumphalist feeling about World War II. I felt World War II began with Pearl Harbor, and then there was D-Day, and, you know, I knew about the Holocaust, there was the atomic bomb, but really it's the story of America saving the world. And when I came to Europe and met people who had lived through Nazi occupations, just heard about the intimacy of the war. Neighbors denouncing each other. There was a woman who'd been in the resistance in our building on Rue La Barrère. She was known as the Angel of Montmartre. I'd read Anne Frank's diary in school, but to be in Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam gave you a whole other feeling, a whole other sense of the reality of this. So I think Femke wound up embodying those two things. She lives through the firebombing of Rotterdam and the occupation of that city, gets out of Rotterdam right with the liberation. She grabs the first Canadian soldier she sees, practically, and gets the hell out of Holland, and then becomes part of this abstract expressionist revolution. In New York, yeah. A big part of the book is set in New York in the 1950s. You have to really like dialogue, because that's all you got. You know, and I started working in theater. I sort of, it happened by accident, really. I always loved going to the theater. I was when I was growing up in New York, my mom on my birthday would take me to see a Broadway show. That's what we love to do. And I was invited to be the artist in residence, a literary consultant at the MC93 Theater in Bobigny. That gig started in 2009 and ended when the theater shut its doors last year. We hope it'll reopen after travaux, but nobody knows. When I got to see the inner workings of the theater, I had this idea for years of a novel about the relationship between Richard Wright and James Baldwin. I mean, some of you might know they had a very contentious relationship. Richard Wright was a mentor to Baldwin, felt that Baldwin betrayed him, and they had a famous fight at the Café Le Deux Magots in May 1953. I was talking with Odile earlier about a biography of Richard Wright by Hazel Rowley, an excellent biography. But only when I read Hazel Rowley's biography did I learn that sitting at the Deux Magots the whole time during this fight that went on for hours was Chester Himes. And all three of them wrote about what happened that night, and each one gave a very different version of what had happened. So I'd had this idea, you know, ever since Hazel's book. Certainly I thought, oh, Himes has got to be in the book. So I had this idea for a novel that I was just sitting with for years. And then working in theater, I thought, you know, this should be a play. That in a novel I could try to replicate the way these characters spoke, but to hear them, and I knew, you know, I mean, I haven't read all the works of all three of them. All three of them were very prolific, but each one has a really distinctive voice as a writer, and I thought that would be just fun to hear that on stage. And so literally overnight, I got the idea, changed it to a play, and part of the thrill of writing the play was capturing the way Wright, Baldwin, and Himes sound. I don't have another idea for a play in my head. I have lots of book ideas, but this one just suddenly presented itself to me as a play. And because dialogue is something I enjoy, something that comes relatively easily, nothing's all that easy in writing, as you know, but it didn't feel like a big leap because I enjoy writing dialogue so much, and enjoyed writing that play more than I've enjoyed anything, really. It was the most fun writing experience I've had, and I'm now in the process of trying to get it staged. In Paris, in London, in New York, and this is the thing with a book, you finish it, you put it out there, publishers say yes or no. With a play, I mean, this is just endless. I feel like I'm, raising this creature.
What's the name of it?
It's called Brothers in Exile. The brothers being Richard Wright, James Baldwin, and Chester Himes. So, but there's going to be a radio adaptation. I adapted it for the radio. It's going to air on France Culture, the French version, of course, in either January or February. So I worked closely with a producer to alter the play. It was much harder than you'd think, because people can't see anything, and a lot of work, but now the producer's happy with it, and she'll get a director, we'll record it, and will air early next year. So that might help get a theater in France.
Are you going to be one of the actors?
No. I'm not an actor. I'm just a ham. I see actors. I can never do what actors do. I can just, ham it up reading my own stuff. Ham turned chicken. Sir.
So does Femke get talked about posthumously?
Well, I don't want to go too much into the title, but there is in that first exchange this whole idea about how we view artists, and so many artists have had terrible, wretched lives, lived in obscurity, and then soon after they're dead. Van Gogh, a few years after he was dead, was a sensation, and Pollock. Good career move, yeah. Andy Warhol, to get back to Warhol said, death can really make you look like a star. And I slide that line somewhere in the book. But Pollock, I think Pollock was a major artist. I think Willem de Kooning is as important. But Pollock, because he died in such spectacular fashion at the peak of his fame, has this sort of mythic, godlike status that de Kooning, who worked into his 90s, doesn't have. So that is a theme of the book, this whole thing about posthumous reputation. But the title takes on several different meanings. Well, certainly Joan Mitchell was an inspiration, and I know a woman here in Paris who knew Joan Mitchell, who was an American painter, moved to France, lived out in Giverny, lived to be probably into her 70s, Femke's not really modeled on her, but she's probably the closest living person, the closest real-life painter who resembles Femke. And one of the challenges of this book was to describe paintings that don't exist. And the fact that they're abstract paintings, I very consciously took on this challenge. I want the reader to try to imagine these paintings as best as I can describe them, but it ends up, I hope, being a collaboration between the writer and the reader. Since these paintings don't exist, since they're not portraits, they're not landscapes, you have to bring your own imagination to the work. Yeah. But in the course of researching this book, I discovered a painter I'd never heard of. I was at MoMA in New York and spotted a painting that I thought was a Pollock I'd never seen before. It was hanging next to a Pollock called a full fathom 5, it's like a small drip painting. And, as everybody knows, Pollock invented drip painting in 1947. It was this great epiphany. And I saw this drip painting on the wall. I walked up to it. I thought it was just amazing looking, and then noticed the name beside the painting. And it was a woman named Janet Sobel. And as startling as it was to see that name, the year was even more surprising. It was 1945. So it's hanging next to Full Fathom 5 from 1947, and it's a drip painting. And thanks to the internet, I was able to find out more about Janet Sobel. This is still an obscure painter. But she's mentioned in a footnote, or in the back page notes of a huge Pollock biography that came out back in the 70s. And in this note, the authors of the biography say that Pollock went to an exhibit of Janet Sobel's paintings in 1945 with Clement Greenberg, the major art critic of that time, and saw these paintings. But Janet Sobel was dismissed as a kind of loon. She was a Ukrainian Jewish housewife living in Brighton Beach, and she just wasn't taken seriously. And after Pollock died, she was going around telling gallerists, I invented drip painting. To this day, her name is largely unknown. So it was exciting to find a painter, a female painter, who had been overlooked, ignored, marginalized in much the same way as my Femke.